What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Overwatch League Season 2 fan thoughts and analysis video. Today we will be going over the roster for the Los Angeles Valiant for Season 2. But before I begin, I just want to say two quick things in case you notice a little bit different in the audio, something a little bit different with the audio. One, I'm sick again. I'd gotten over it last week, and then I got sick again because I can only assume for the second reason, or second thing I want to mention, is that I'm home now. So I'm back home for another month or so. So we'll hopefully not have this sickness issue for much longer, but probably this whole week at least. The next three or four videos or so, I'll be sick. So with that in mind, let's talk about the Los Angeles Valiant, the number 2 overall team from last season, and the winners of the Pacific Division. We have the Los Angeles Valiant, which is a team that had some interesting changes during the offseason. They got rid of 4 players: Verbo, Numlocked, Fincy, and Soon. Fincy and Soon managed to find their way on the Paris Eternal, who we will talk about in the next couple of weeks. But let's take a look at this team's roster. I'm very interested in seeing this roster, so let's just jump into it. And we're going to start with the DPS role. We'll start with Agilities, who of course played last season. Played the entire season. He was a very consistent player. I like him. I think he is very good. He had good Pharah, he had good Genji, he had good everybody that they needed him to play. He's not going to be their Widowmaker player, and obviously with the departure of Soon, who was their Widowmaker player and who is a relatively dominant Widowmaker player, I think Agilities will be somewhat weaker with what's around him, and it might not give him the opportunities that he had with Soon. Especially if he's playing Pharah. A big part of Pharah is that your Widowmaker can make sure the other Widowmaker is not an issue, and I wonder if the DPS players that the Valiant have around them otherwise are really enough to fill that hole that Soon left. I'm curious to see what we see, but with Agilities, I still think he'll be as good as he was last year. I think he'll be, if not, he might even be better with a little bit more time. I really liked him last year. I thought he was a good player last year. The Valiant were one of my favorite teams to watch late in the season. They surprised me. I think they surprised a lot of people. But they did a lot of dealing, and they really rebuilt this roster halfway through the season. The addition of Custa, the addition of, who else did they have? They had added KSF and Fincy and Izayaki we'll get to. But they got rid of some players. They added Bunny. So they really did make some moves late in the season. They got rid of some players. They added some players. And I think that really helped this team. Agilities, of course, has been with the team from the very beginning. And actually is the only person left on this team that they had in October of last year. Little interesting fact that doesn't really matter. I should say he was announced in October, so it doesn't really matter, but I do like Agilities, and I think he is someone who will continue to play well, and I'm excited to see what we get from him going forward. Next, we have the other 2 DPS players that will most likely be competing for that spot: KSF and Bunny. Now, I think most likely Bunny will be the one who plays Widowmaker for the most part. I think he is the better Widowmaker, but I really like KSF. I think KSF had a very good game last season. I don't remember exactly what game it was. I'm going to try to look it up while I'm talking here. But I think these two are going to be really kind of what they need in a way. they have a good duo here that can fill the role that they need. KSF obviously not as experienced as Bunny is. Bunny has a lot more time. He started with the Seoul Dynasty and then went over to the LA Valiant. He played for Lunatic High. He played for BK Stars. KSF played before joining the LA Valiant. Played for Simplicity. Played for You Guys Get Paid. Taco Men. Envision Esports. Didn't really play on a lot of these big rosters and these big teams. So I'm curious to see what he does going forward with this team, because I think he will be a very big part of this team, and he will be a big part of the potential success they find. I think it'll be interesting to watch his growth, to see how much he's evolved from last season. I think it'd be cool. I think he will be fun to watch. It potentially be significantly better. We don't know. But I think that the two of them will show something that we maybe haven't really seen from this team. Losing Soon is definitely big. I'm not going to try to undersell the loss of Soon. Losing Soon is bad, and that's a big loss. But I think that is really the only thing they lost. And while that's a bad loss, you don't want to lose a player like that. The game, by the way, I found it. It was against the San Francisco Shock that he played. While I think the loss of Soon is bad, and I think that is a loss that will be felt by this team, I think KSF and Bunny will fill that hole as best as they can. My one real gripe with the LA Valiant is they didn't... LA Valiant. My one real gripe with them is that they didn't really look to fill that hole. Now, I believe it's because they had trust in KSF and in Bunny. We'll talk about some other players later on that I think have a chance to also potentially play that role. And I look at really what they've done, and I kind of wish they had gone out after another DPS player, a hit scan player specifically. There might not have been any out there for them to take and to sign. That's very, very possible. But I think what this team has right now is good, is solid, and I think it will make this team, I think, will still be successful in that DPS role. Maybe slightly less so, but I think they will find success. Next, we have the tank play, and we're going to start with Fate, who was very, very good last season. I think Fate was one of the unsung heroes for this team. I enjoyed watching him. I thought he played very well. Maybe he wasn't an unsung hero. Maybe he actually was fantastic. And people were like, I wouldn't call him an unsung hero. He was one of the best players, one of the best tanks. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. I really like him. I think he held his own against a lot of these other tanks. He was on the South Korean World Cup team, so he was good. And he played well. And he was one of the few players, in my opinion, that really knew how to work with this Valiant system kind of from the get-go. Obviously, the team evolved and they added new players, but I think he was one of the players that really, really played well from the start. And I think that when you look at some of these teams that had those kind of slow starts that really took off, usually it's kind of a team thing, and there's a couple players here and there that play well and keep the team kind of in some of these games. I think Fate was that for this team. So that's their main tank that I expect to play most of the games this season and really, I don't expect to see him sit very often. But they did sign another main tank player, and it is Kuki, coming from the Seoul Dynasty, who it was a transfer. It's interesting. Obviously, they had another tank player in Numlocked, but of course he is no longer with the team. He is now with the British Hurricane. So I look at Numlocked compared to Kuki. Kuki's a lot better. I don't think Numlocked will play that much at all, if he even plays at all. I really don't expect to see a lot of play out of Kuki, but I think he is at least an improvement, and you can put him in when you need him if you don't want to be playing Fate for whatever reason, if there is a reason. But I'll be interested to see what kind of player we get from Kuki on this team. Obviously, Kuki played for the Seoul Dynasty and was pretty good, but wasn't the star tank on that team. So I'm curious to see what he does here. But I expect Fate to play the most part. Play for the most part. I really can't talk. I'm tired. I'm sick. That's how it is sometimes. So their main tank role, I'm not too worried about. I think their main tank role will be just fine, carrying over from last season. I don't expect it to struggle at all. Then their flex tank role, of course, is Space. One of the best flex tank players in the world. I think that as long as Space is playing, if he plays anything like he did last season, this team will be competitive. This team will be in the playoff race. This team will be in the division race. Space is that good of a player. I really like Space. I think he's one of the most exciting players to watch. He's a dynamic flex tank player. He's a very good diva player. I've enjoyed watching him. I enjoyed him in the Overwatch World Cup with Team USA. I enjoyed him in Season 1 of the Overwatch League. I don't think you can sing his praises enough. I would argue that if Space could have played at the beginning of the season, that he was too young at the beginning of the season, he couldn't play, but once he was able to play, I feel like he just was dominant. And he played very well, and he did his thing well, and he did it the way that you should really do it, in a way. And I just think that he is such a big part of this team. Even if he's not the captain, I think he's one of the leaders of this team. I think he has been a big reason for this team's success late in the season, because he was old enough to play, and once he was able to play, this team kind of turned around. So I expect Space to be a big part of this team again. I expect him to continue his dominance and play very well. When you have a diva player, more so than any other hero, I think, maybe Widowmaker and maybe Tracer when she's in the meta, but those are the heroes that kind of change the game a lot. If you have a really good Widowmaker who can just get picks and picks and picks, then you change the game because the other team can't really fight because they're just losing people all the time. Same with a Tracer. If you have a really good Tracer that can just sneak in, get a kill and leave, like we saw with Sabiobi in a lot of Stage 3, we saw it with Striker, also in Stage 3 we saw it with Prophet, we saw it with several players throughout Season 1. When Tracer was in the meta and was very dominant, she would basically win team fights. She would go in, she'd get a pick on the Mercy, she'd get a pick on whatever hero was really important to that team's push, and instantly their push was halted. Diva can do the same thing if you have a really, really good Diva player. And in theory, any hero can do that if you have a really good person on that hero. But I think with the way Space played, he was changing games for this team. And he did things that I thought really, really, really helped this team get to the point, where they were the second overall seed going into the playoffs at the end of the season. And it wasn't just they were the second overall because they won the Pacific. They were the second overall because they had the second best record as well. So, winning the Stage 4 finals, Space was a big part of this team's success. I think he will continue to be a big part of this team's success. And if he plays well, this team will continue to succeed. If he doesn't play well, I think this team will struggle. But I don't think this team will be out. The one issue this team has, of course, if Space is struggling, is that he is their only flex tank. So if he's not playing well, they don't really have anybody else. Maybe you put in one of your DPS players on that Diva, but you have to roll with space. And I think that regardless of if he's playing well or not, he's going to be your best option. So it'll be curious to see long-term success that they find with space. I'm excited to see how a whole season with space goes. But I really like this team with space in the flex tank role. Finally, we have the supports, and we have 3 supports on this team. We'll start, of course, with the team captain for this team, the Australian menace, Custa. Of course, formerly played for the Dallas Fuel, was traded to the LA Valiant, and I think was a huge part in this team's turnaround, of course. As much as I love space, and I think he was a big part of it, I think Custa was as big of a part of it. It's very interesting to look at, of course, with a lot of these teams that had those mid-season changes, because some didn't have a lot. You look at a team like the LA Gladiators, they didn't really change a ton of their roster. They added Fissure, that was the big signing they had, or the big trade that they had, but they didn't and they added Silk Thread, of course, from the LA Valiant, but they didn't add the amount of players that the Valiant did. Now, technically, the Valiant didn't add space. They already had him on the roster. He just couldn't play because he was too young. But the Valiant made wholesale moves to keep their team successful, or to find that success. And Custa was a big part of that, and he is the team captain. A lot of it, I think, comes down to that reason, right? He played very well in that Mercy role. He might be the best Western Mercy. I think there's an argument to be made. I really like Neptuno as well. Of course, you have to talk about him when you talk about Western Mercies, but I think Custa is also up there as one of the top Western Mercies, and I think there's definitely an argument to be made there. I really like the way Custa plays, and I think he has been a good leader for this team. I think this team has really rallied around him. Obviously, he wasn't there from the beginning. He comes in and he has to take this big leadership role, and I think he did a great job at doing that. I expect him to be as successful as he was last season. I'm glad that he really cares about the team. I always think that it can't be easy to be traded in an esport. It can't be very easy to be traded in any sport, really, but especially here, because it's all really about the communication that you've built up, and the energy, and that you just kind of know the way people play. When you get into this new scheme, I imagine it's pretty hard. When then you go into a new scheme and then you're made the captain, I definitely imagine it's not the easiest thing. But I think Custa is a fantastic player, and I think he will continue his leadership and will be what they need going forward. In the off support role, we have Kareev, who also plays a little bit of DPS here and there. He plays some Widowmaker and whatnot, so in theory you could have Kareev play Widowmaker if they needed Kareev to. They do have another flex support who we'll talk about here. I already mentioned them, but they do have Kareev. I thought Kareev was one of the better Zenyatas throughout the season. I thought he played pretty well. Wasn't fantastic, wasn't Jonak level, but he was consistently playing well in my eyes. I thought he looked like a player that performed, and that's really all you can ask for in a lot of ways, is just, do they play well? Are they performing? Okay, well then that's all you really need. And I thought Kareev was pretty good. You pair him now with Izayaki, who is also that Zenyatta, that Ana player. I think he might have played a little bit of Widowmaker here and there. Don't quote me on that. I think he might have, but I'm not positive. But Kareev definitely has played some Widowmaker in the past. So if you need to have Kareev on that Widowmaker, if KSF and Bunny aren't playing as well, and you need to take Kareev to put in that role, you do have Izayaki as a backup. And I think we haven't seen a lot of Izayaki, so I don't know a ton about Izayaki, but Izayaki was on this team last season. There is already that chemistry there, at least in scrim. Maybe not on stage, but at least there's some of that scrim time that he has with this team. So he's been there for a while. I imagine that he will be a necessary backup at times this season, especially if the Widowmaker play is struggling. But I look at this team and I think really the only fault I would give to this team is that they don't seem to have that big Widowmaker player. Now maybe Widowmaker won't matter to the meta. Maybe triple tank, triple support will be the big meta. And Widowmaker play won't be that big of a deal. But with how big it was last season, for the entire season, really, it wasn't just the end of the season, right? It wasn't just Stage 4. Well, Stage 4 was, I would say, marked by the Widowmaker play because there was no dominant Tracer play going on. You had your Brigitte kind of stopping that. But I think when you look at this team, if Widowmaker's not as big in the meta, they should be fine. If Widowmaker is really big in the meta, they might run into some issues. But I think that the trio, I guess, of KSF, Bunny, and Kariv, one of them will pick up the load as needed, and I think that they'll turn out fine. They'll do what they have to do to get those wins, to get those dubs, as people say nowadays. And I think that they will succeed. I really think this team is good. I've seen a lot of people that are down on this team because the loss of Soon is that big. Realistically, I think yes, it's a big loss. Realistically, I also don't think it's an organization-changing loss. Right? I don't think this team is going to be this horrendous, just horrible team, like not even competing for their division title this season because they lost Soon. I think that there's a bit of freak out that's unnecessary. And I'm talking mainly about what I saw on Watchpoint with the power rankings that they gave. And obviously they were still favored. They were still a high-ranked team. But I think there's a bit of an over-exaggeration on the DPS play. And obviously it's hard to tell what the meta is going to be. And if we're in a Widowmaker-heavy meta right off the bat, then yes, of course, it could be an issue for this team. But I don't know if it will be. Maybe it's an Ashe-heavy meta. And if it is an Ashe-heavy meta, maybe they still do run into problems. But I look at this team overall, and I don't really see these big, glaring weaknesses compared to this roster from last season. It's mostly the same team. With the exception of Soon, they did not lose anything. Fincy, Dumblock, and Verbo never played. So I don't really think there's much of a downside to this team. Truthfully, I don't. I don't quite think this team is as good as they were last season. By maybe like, if I had to give them a percentage, right, I'd say they were about like a 90% team last season, right? In terms of like, or not even, we'll say if last season was them at 100%, this season they're like 95. Maybe they're slightly worse without Soon, but I think it's an over-exaggeration. I think this team will be fine. I do think this team will be competing for another Pacific Division title. But of course, their competition this season a little bit tougher than last season. But we'll talk more about that in the next few weeks as we continue talking about some of these teams. But that is where I'm going to stop my video on the Valiant. If you want to leave your own opinions on the Valiant, leave those down in the comments down below. We got one more team from the original group, the original 12, next week, or not next week, on Friday, with the New York Excelsior. Then we'll move on to the expansion teams, and I'm super excited to talk about the expansion teams, but that is all I have for you today. So if you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing. It helps out the channel, helps get those algorithm boosts. Let me know if there's stuff you think I could improve upon with these videos, because I know there is stuff, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. But that is everything. Thank you for watching. I will see you all in the next video, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.